This podcast with a former administrator of FEMA contains explicit language. Just one word, but it's a doozy. Happy July 4th.
Yeah, 4th of July week. This is great.
Independence Day. This is what happened to me last night.
Yeah.
I was sitting on our deck, and, you know, we live on an urban street. We're looking out over the street. Dude comes out under the streetlight, huge box of fireworks, like this big, lays it out in the middle of the street.
And let me just add, you live in the middle of Brooklyn.
That's right. That's right. Puts it down in the middle of the street, waits for a red light, lights it,
What?
and then literally, this is not little sparklers. This is like,
Yeah.
like massive explosions happening.
Oh my gosh.
And it's so long, it keeps going, that the light turns green, and suddenly there's like traffic driving right by on either side of the
Did they
fire.
send the helicopters? They deploy the helicopters?
They couldn't get through because there's too much land fire. You know, the helicopters were under threat.
Yeah.
I was like,
you know, how else are you going to celebrate America?
that's right. That was
Breaking
what I
some
thought.
laws.
That's what we are here in America.
Blowing some up.
If there's anything the United States is good at, it's blowing stuff up and traffic nightmares.
That's right. Yeah, definitely in this city. So we may have to retire after this episode.
That's right. That's right. We've reached the pinnacle.
We have a pretty special guest. I'm going to first read his bio before and make him stand by awkwardly on the phone without saying anything. But we have with us the man, the myth, the legend, William Craig Fugate. I'm going to read a snippet of his bio off of Wikipedia,
Right,
which is
the
the
first
source
guest
for
we've ever
emergency
had.
managers.
That's right, it is. The
Yeah.
first guest we've had that's rated a Wikipedia entry.
That's true. Mm-hmm. That's right. So let me get to it. So he was born May 14th, 1984.
That's right.
This is off of Wikipedia, so that could be wrong.
Yeah,
but
it's 59. I'm just going to be clear. It's 59.
he's the former administrator of FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. As Florida Director of Emergency Management, he oversaw the Big Four of '04, which we'll talk a little bit about. Mitch and I both kind of have tie-ins to that summer. And as an administrator of FEMA, he organized the recovery efforts for a record of 87 disasters in 2011.
Yeah, I thought that was 99, actually.
Oh.
Craig, is it 87 or 99 in 2011?
I have no idea. I never counted.
Well, okay, we're out here keeping score.
That's right. Well, Craig, first of all, thank you so much for joining us. This is a real honor for us, and we're jazzed to have you on.
This is our serious kind of the Duke's interview with you, Craig. And so I just want to start out with a serious personal question. When you were serving as FEMA administrator, did you ever play basketball with President Obama?
Nope.
Did you ever play football with President Obama?
No sports.
No sports. All right. Well, apart from sports, did he actually tell you not to screw up Sandy?
That's right.
No. It says don't fuck it up, Fugate.
That's right.
Craig, a lot of, we do have a good amount of emergency managers that listen to the podcast, and some probably also a good selection of non-emergency managers. So I think, people are kind of aware of your career history starting in Florida, as a fire chief. But, I'm curious, when you made that jump from operations, from fire chief over to emergency management, what was it that made you kind of want to make the jump from a response-focused career to more of a, emergency management, traditional training, planning, exercise, and response?
Well, first of all, I wasn't a fire chief. I just got promoted to lieutenant in fire rescue.
Okay.
And as one of the requirements of the new lieutenants, we were required to do a management project. The idea being most of us had come right off the street and had very little office experience. So the goal was to put us into that environment. And so I got a project. I was given three choices, and the one I picked was updating the county's disaster plan. And I was actually taking some online courses through the University of Cincinnati Fire Science Program, one of the very early online degree programs you could take. And the classes I were taking was actually disaster response in the fire service. So I figured, well, I'll go do this project. It was a 2-week reassignment downtown. I'd go do that, and I could use it as part of my class project. So, it was really less about some big, idea I was going to do something as I got a phone call. I answered the phone call, said, hey, you're going to go work on these projects. Pick one of 3 things. I picked updating the county's disaster plan. And when I got in there and realized whoever had written the plan hadn't done a very good job, I started realizing, well, I could do better than that. And I found it rather interesting. And it really, to me, was just something I started, looking at. And I ended up doing some briefings for some new county commissioners. And the county manager at the time, Bob Fernandez, had indicated to my boss, who was this guy named Ron Cunningham, that my talents were probably not being as utilized as well in the field, and I should be reassigned to this. So that was in February of 1987, and that was the last time I worked on the road full-time as a paramedic.
One thing I've heard about your past is you've said in interviews that you never had to apply for another job after that. That the job officers, you got the call to then go to the county. You got the call to go to the state. Then you got sort of invited to go to the federal government. What do you think? And I know every emergency manager out there is going like, oh my God, why do I have to keep applying? What do you think it was that sort of led to that level of success?
Well, I think it was. I wasn't looking for something else to do. I was trying to do, my job. I was always looking at how to solve the problems. I always looked at it as an opportunity to keep getting better. And I spent a lot of time building these programs. Pretty much the county program, I was building it from scratch. So, when people say, what happened? I said, I answered my phone. There was no master plan. I never, set out to go do things, but when opportunities came up, I tended to be in a position where I could take advantage of them and say yes. And I just was fortunate to be in the right place at the right time. I tell people, a lot of this was doing nothing more than just being able to answer my phone when people called. And when they called, and I was able to say yes, the opportunity to move on to the next part of my career.
So at each of these steps in your career, were you able to take, best practices, lessons learned to that next step, or was each of these kind of major jumps kind of a new ball game?
No, most of them were building blocks. As I try to tell people, if you understand what emergency management is and you're a practitioner of the craft, then it doesn't matter whether you're at the local, state, or federal level, you're still an emergency manager. You may have more management responsibilities, but the basic of emergency management don't suddenly change. The scale, scope, time frames, variety of hazards definitely expands the further up you go. But the basic stuff doesn't change, and I think that's where I was fortunate to have a lot of time to grow as an emergency manager before I went to the state, and then a lot of time to grow at the state before I went to FEMA. So it was... For me, it was, if somebody had laid this out, said this is the plan, I would go, well, actually it makes pretty good sense. But not knowing I had a plan or what was going to happen, in some cases, I'm kind of amazed it all turned out as well as it did.
What I love about that is that's exactly the emergency manager experience of every disaster.
Right.
Like I really had to improvise. It's really lucky it all turned out as well as it did at the end of it. So let's talk. Maybe we can zoom in on what those principles of emergency management are for our listeners, what your spin on. So before you got to Don't Fuck It Up, Fugate, what are the elements that were that you feel like were in there that you were really trying to make sure that you had in your emergency management practice?
Well, the first thing is getting people to realize, our job isn't Tommy Lee Jones, and I like Tommy Lee Jones. He's a great actor, but what he did, what was that movie, Volcano?
Yeah, it was Volcano, Craig. Come on, don't act like you don't know.
Volcano, something like that. This idea that you're this guy that's going to run around, or this woman that's going to run around, and you're basically a super action hero, and You got all this great tech, and you're going to roll in and solve all the problems.
Yeah.
Um,
You can
kinda
commandeer resources too. That's the other part about it. Like,
Yeah, and it's like, well, if you're waiting until the event to do all that, you're probably not going to be a super action hero. You're probably not going to be employed very long. And it's really about building teams. Essentially, when I try to explain to people what I do, I figured out, I start talking to emergency management, they kind of glaze over and have no clue. So I say, essentially what I do, my job is when the org chart of government doesn't work, when the crisis is too big, it's moving too fast, and the day-to-day mechanisms aren't going to cope. And I try to tell people, distinguishes emergencies from disasters. If you dial 911 and emergency services get there and they handle it, for that family, for that person, that could be the worst thing that ever happened to them. But for the system, that's working as designed. That's not why you need people like us. You need people like us when it's bigger than the system. The complexity and the speed at which the crisis is occurring is bigger than any one agency to solve on their own. It's about basically taking that org chart and reconfiguring it around the things that need to be done and getting agencies to give up some of their autonomy and some of their turf and work as a team. And it's much easier, you guys know, to say that than it is actually get agencies to do that. And if they don't have a lot of trust in you, if you're not willing to essentially, in some cases, be almost, how do you phrase this? The last thing you want to be doing is taking credit for a job well done. You want the agencies that responded to get that credit. In the back of your mind that, hey, I had something to do with that. But if this is about you getting the credit, you being the hero, you saving the community, most agencies aren't going to give you the time of day, and you're not going to be able to build that team. And that's really what I found when I got into this at the local, state, federal level. It was less about, everything, you got all the answers, you've got solutions for every problem, as much as you're able to build a team of different agencies, oftentimes with competing views and interests, but can come together in a crisis, give what they do best, but allow others to take and do stuff that historically they would never have trusted another agency to support them or do. And the best responses I ever saw that I ever got to be part of, and this is not for me, this is one of my agency heads in Florida, was Secretary of Department of Transportation, said, when you walk into the state EOC, you check your egos and your logos at the door and you work as one team. And when that's what happens, it's incredible how fast and how powerful that team can be in responding. And in my case, the 4 hurricanes, one right after another in the 4 hurricane season.
Yeah, and did you find that was a challenge at all levels of government, of getting agencies to kind of give up the turf battles and work together, or is it more of a challenge at, say, the local?
I just want to say, I'm sure that's easy in Washington. I think that's exactly where there are no egos in this playing field.
Well, the saying in Washington is, it's amazing how much you can do if you don't take any credit for it. And so that was really, the lessons I learned in Florida was, when you're responding to something like that, you've got to remember, if those agencies don't see that there's value added in what you do for them, they will go their own way. And I was just fortunate, both with President Obama, but back when I worked for Governor Bush, both as chief executives made it clear they expected the agencies to work through the system. President Obama established that by multiple trips to FEMA for various events, including disasters. And so when you have cabinet agencies meeting at FEMA, including the Secretary of Defense, which is like unheard of,
right?
Because the president's convening a sub-cabinet meeting in the middle of a crisis, and he's holding it at FEMA. That sends a very powerful message, notwithstanding what he also then turned around and told agencies that we were going to work the system as designed, we're going to work our plans, we're going to work as a team. That ability to have the chief executive say that just makes your life so much better. I can remember Governor Bush, we would do these exercises, and his chief of staff would literally take roll of agency heads who had decided that they weren't going, and then later found out the governor's going to be there, and they're yelling at me, well, I didn't know the governor's going to be there. And I'm like, why did you think we called it the governor's exercise?
Oh, jeez.
It's just branding.
Yeah, corporate branding. I mean, you bring up a good point there, Craig, and I think, you've served over under both Republicans and Democrats, and I'm still not totally sure where you fall on the political spectrum, but, is it important for emergency managers to stay apolitical? And, what tips, I guess, do you have for emergency managers that maybe don't agree politically with the person they're serving under?
Resign and go do something else. You're neither doing yourself a favor nor you performing your function, which is to provide the best quality skills and advice to the leadership. If you don't trust them, if you can't support them, then you owe it to them and yourself to get out of their way. And I've tried to tell people this, and sometimes they hear me, sometimes they don't. So never work for anybody unless you're their go-to person. If you're not the person they're going to go to in an emergency, you're the wrong person in the job. You're just hanging on. Particularly in changes in administration, if you're not their go-to person, then in a crisis they're going to go somewhere else, which means you're not serving them, nor have you served the people you work with. You've actually done a disservice to everybody.
Yeah, it's not just neutral, it's actually negative, right? You're taking resources away from this agency.
Well, let me ask you this. What that implies is that trust, responsibility aren't functions of political parties, right? I mean, right now we're living in this really politicized era, but you're saying it's based on more than that. So what is it?
It's about being the public servant who understands you serve political leadership. Now, think about all the authorities that emergency managers sometimes have the illusion that they have. Where does that arise from? It arises from the elected officials. None of us that are appointed have that inherent authority. It's usually by constitution or by statute vested in the elected chief leader. Whether it's a mayor, whether it's the president, a governor, you may have managers, you may have all kinds of people that do all this stuff, but the actual authorities in law is usually given to the senior elected executive at each level of government. And if you do not have the confidence in that person, you cannot serve that person, then it's a mistake. You should really, understand that you're not going to be contributing, and particularly in a crisis, if you are not seen as at least being neutral, an honest broker, somebody that person can trust. Because again, you think about it, in many cases, they're putting their political future in your hands in a crisis. And if they don't trust you and if they won't commit to the team and to you because they don't see you as somebody who's part of their team or somebody that they at least feel is not going to give them answers based on how you think it's going to help you, but basically what it is for them and the community. And I just think that for a lot of people, that we're in this business, we go through all these transitions, and sometimes you see people that are what I call lifers. They go through multiple changes. But when there's a bad crisis, who's standing next to that official? And the ones that are standing next to them, the ones they trust, they tend to do well. But it is something, I think, again, that we work at the pleasure of. We serve those officials. We really, as somebody once said, disasters don't happen. Disasters don't care about your politics. They don't care about, how prepared you are, and they certainly don't care if you've had an exercise to get ready. They happen, you deal with them. And so, politics and understanding the political process is not the same thing as practicing politics in your job.
Have you always seen emergency response be this politicized, or is that really a result of kind of the post 9/11 era? Like, has it always been this political? Have politicians always been this involved in the response, or is it kind of since 9/11 where that really ramped up?
Well, I think it basically goes back to disasters in Florida. It was Hurricane Andrew. It became a big deal. If your governor, the late Governor Childs, took a lot of steps to reform emergency management after the Hurricane Andrew response. But it really took until 9/11 that you saw something on a federal scale that really shook the nation to its core and suddenly became not just a local or state issue, but really a highly elevated national issue. Even most of the disasters prior to that point were seen as local, regional issues. And then you reinforce that with Katrina, which many people saw as nationally as an embarrassment. Here we are in the United States, we can't do better than this. And all the finger pointing that went on after that, Congress actually authorized FEMA for the first time, substantial changes to legislation, substantial changes to resources. That would not have happened, I think, if we had not had a Katrina. So in many ways, the understanding the elevation of these risks, I think, is because we're seeing and have seen events that resonated across the country as we have to do better, and the status quo is no longer adequate.
Let's rewind the clock a little bit and talk about your sort of entrance onto the national stage in a little more detail. To kind of leading up to the post-Katrina Emergency Management Reform Act, you were in Florida. People talk a lot about the 2004 hurricane season and then leading into the Florida response to Katrina. I guess, to my knowledge, that was the first time you were really put at this level of visibility. I wonder if you could talk to the nuts and bolts crisis decision making that you went through during that 2004 season.
During 04, I think probably the biggest change that was underway was this idea that I kept looking at why it took us so long to get into disaster areas. And a lot of it had to do with this idea that when disasters happen, we have to send out teams and do assessments, determine how bad it is so we can respond. And this came out of Hurricane Andrew when, we had significant damages south of 122nd Street, but the initial reports further north was, hey, it looks like we dodged a bullet. And the assumption was, well, we're not getting a lot of 911 calls, so it must not be that bad. Well, the reason you're not getting 911 calls is there's no circuits working down there. So you start thinking that, well, the lesson we've learned here is we got to do a better job of assessing the damages and get that information in quicker, and we got to send teams down, and we're going to do all this rapid impact assessments. And it turned out it wasn't really speeding the process up. And I kind of started asking this question. I said, so what are we really doing here? Well, we have to assess it. I'm like, why? Well, we don't know how bad it is. I'm like, well, why don't we assume it's bad and respond like that? They're like, what? Well, you won't know what to send. And I'm like, guys, we've been doing this a while. We know about how many people, well, we should know how many people live down there. We can pretty well model what probably has happened. We can make some educated assumptions about it was going to be bad. So why don't we respond like it's bad? Well, we may send too much stuff. I'm like, yeah, but we probably won't because we're not that smart and we probably can't get there fast enough anyway. And then I caught some flack from the counties going, hey, what are you doing, coming in here and taking over? And I'm like, no. But if I wait for you to do an assessment and ask for something, we're going to be another 24 hours before anything moves, and the state's too big. So we're going to do something different. We don't do this for every little flood or little tornado touchdown, but when we got hurricanes coming in and they're rather significant, we're going to build our response around what we think is the likely worst-case scenario. We're going to order up the teams, order up the resources, and we're going to respond like that. And we're going to go until we either get there and find out it's not that bad, or we get there and find out it's worse and we need more stuff. But we're not waiting for an assessment before we make our first move. We're going to put together our response. And essentially, as soon as it's safe to start moving, not when the sky is blue, but when it's safe to start moving, we're moving to the area of impact. And we will drive our teams in until we get to the area, and we'll go to work.
So why is it, because I've been in a lot of EOCs, people are terrified to do that. Like, I think if I'm a regular listener listening to you, I'm like, well, that makes sense. But in the EOCs I've worked in, people always are like, got to check off the assessment, got to get the requests in. Why do you think emergency managers don't take this step more often?
Because on a day-to-day basis, we work in government, and the biggest fear is waste, abuse. We have all these check cards and all these rules to keep us from, making those types of decisions. If you think about it, when you're not dealing with a time pressure, you have lots of time to get to the best possible answer. And the last thing anybody wants to do is to make a mistake and get hauled before a hearing or an IG investigation or somebody come in afterwards and criticize your response. And so the tendency is the biases on the day-to-day basis is, because you do have the time, is to look for a degree of perfection which doesn't exist in disasters. And the thing I try to get across to people is the most precious commodity in a disaster response is time. Anything that delays action, to me, is bad. And the more people want more information before they get to that tipping point of making a decision, the more I began to realize that it wasn't significantly changing the outcome. All it was doing was making us later. And it wasn't even better. Most of the time, the information, even after 24 hours, is still so vague that it's barely actionable. So why wait? If you get a triggering event, and I define those as it's an event likely to require outside resources, I don't have a definite request. But if I wait, it's too late. We're not coming in to take over. We're not moving. We're not getting things en route. By the time we do, we're not going to be able to change the outcome, because everybody talks about responding. But responding has got to be tied to what outcome you're going to change, and that has some very definite time hacks on it. The injured are not going to wait around forever. They're either going to be okay or they're going to perish. They're going to die. So, you don't have 2 or 3 days to go do assessments and decide you need to do search and rescue. If you need to do search and rescue, you better do it as quickly as you can physically get there. If you're waiting for assessments to tell you need to do it, you're not saving lives.
Yeah, that's a great point. You've also said in interviews that emergency managers need to be geared or bent toward proactiveness. And, I'm wondering if you think our industry is bent toward reactiveness. And is that a result of just kind of the nature of emergency management being you wait till an emergency happens and then you respond to it? And, do you see that hesitation, that reactiveness as a problem kind of throughout emergency management?
It's just a problem throughout government. And you think about emergency management teams, we're taking people that on a day-to-day basis don't do disasters. They're coming into a foreign environment to them. Hopefully you've done a lot of exercising and training, so at least they're comfortable there. But think about their day-to-day decision-making and biases. And this is true just about anywhere I've gone. People will always default to what they know in a crisis. So if what they know is a deliberative process with lots of meetings, lots of time to make decisions, that there's greater penalty for making mistakes than to take more time to get the most, best decision you can get to, and you put them into a disaster environment and you expect them to perform differently, you're fooling yourself. And that's why when I said you got to build a team that trusts you, that they have to have trust among themselves, because you're going to be asking them to do something that is inherently not in their nature to do. And there's individuals that, they get it and they do it, but as organizations and bureaucracies, it's not in their nature. And so you have to provide the sometimes not the so gentle nudge to get things moving, but also the safe environment that say, hey guys, we're not going to be right all the time, and when we screw up, it's going to probably be spectacular. And hey, guess what? I got that one. If there's a hearing, I'll be testifying. But as I found out, particularly in Washington, when you have a big disaster, if you don't send enough stuff, they're going to have hearings. If you send too much stuff, there's going to be hearings. The only difference between those two hearings, if you send too much stuff, you probably still have a job. If you didn't send enough stuff, you're probably going home.
Craig, you're taking us to school up in here. Well, okay, let's talk about team building.
Sure.
Then,
yeah.
So, because I think one of the things you're legendary for at FEMA are the Thunderbolt exercises, and these are.
I'm sorry, we don't have a lightning. I hope you had a button at FEMA you could push that just played like a lightning sound.
Yeah, that's right. Did you have a lightning button?
I guess it's a
FEMA?
thunder sound.
Yeah, lightning doesn't.
No, and I actually started these back in Florida, and we were doing these well before 2004 hurricane season. I had realized that with all the emphasis on Homeland Security and how distracting that was, and we hadn't had any storms, that almost everybody was so focused on that they had forgotten everything else we had to do. So I started doing these exercise vignettes just to get people back into the EOC and to get them more used to those roles. And then I started introducing the idea that I would just tell them that for the next couple of months there will be no-nose exercises, and I call them Thunderbolts. And I got to the point where I would a lot of times just write something down on a 3x5 index card, walk into the state warning point, hand it to the watch operator, and say, send this out.
No.
And they would look at me and go, are you serious? I'm like, yeah, just send it. And one time I just did, and sometimes it's just simple things. Like I set out our mobile command post, and I kind of looked at it and said, I wonder when's the last time anybody's actually crawled through this thing. So I sent a message from sitting outside the mobile command post that I wanted the Type 3 IMAT team to take the vehicle, move it across the parking lot, make contact with all 67 counties, 7 National Weather Service offices, and 3 nuclear power plant sites without using the public switch network or cellular phones. They had satellite capability. And they couldn't find the keys to it. Half the stuff was out for maintenance. And I was like, guys, what business do you think we're in? They're going, well, it's not hurricane season. I'm like, guys, what makes you think the only things we'll ever have to deal with are things we know are coming? And that's when I began to realize that we tend to always practice and exercise our last big events. And in Florida, it's been hurricanes. Do you see them coming? I said, well, what about, a terrorist attack? What about a chemical event? What about a natural gas pipeline explosion in of all places, Perry, Florida, which actually happened? So it was really to get the team, not so much to, test them, but to get them into that mode that disasters weren't predictable, that they needed to be able to quickly, with little notice and little prep, roll into that operations center. And actually, over time, they kind of took a first pride in it. First, some of them hated it, but over time, it was sort of like, if I hadn't done one in a while, they'd all be like, so when we're going to have our next Thunderbolt? I'm like, I thought you guys hated it. Well, they're kind of fun because we never know what you're going to do.
I like it. It's like, what freaky thing is Craig going to do now?
Right.
Well, yeah, we came up with all kinds of cool stuff. But I remember one time I walked in there, and we were having power outages across the state that nobody could explain. And I activated it. They actually thought it was a Thunderbolt. And it turned out we were dealing with an actual energy generation shortfall. We had an incident at one of the power plants, and it had tripped. And we had cascading blackouts all over the state. Nobody really had a good handle on it. So we activated the EOC. And, an hour and a half later, we had all the information. We knew what was going on. And we could pretty well say, okay, we can stand down. This is not going to extend it to the night. And they actually thought it was a Thunderbolt, so they got in there and realized, I said, this is not a Thunderbolt. This is an actual event. We've got problems, and we don't know what's causing it. Figure this out.
I mean, I totally hear that. It's your EOC. You're like the mad genius in charge of it in Florida. You go to Washington, D.C. You're the FEMA administrator. How do you convince these folks to do Thunderbolt exercises instead of like the big things with the binders that everybody
It takes
does?
6 months to plan, yeah.
You don't ask them.
I guess that's a perk of being an administrator of FEMA, yeah.
Yeah, I conspired with a very small team of people that I read into what I was going to do. I had FEMA Region 9 who had just gone through an exercise with California, Golden Guardian, basically just phone in the exercise parameters of the event, which is a major earthquake, and send it into the FEMA Operations Center. And then I told, the FEMA Operations Center says, hey, we got this exercise message. We don't know there's an exercise. I said, run it. And they're like, are you sure? And I'm like, yeah, run it. Well, of course, it was like 6 a.m. in the morning. And so we sent out our notifications to activate the NRCC to a level 1, which is the National Response Coordination Center. That's came as EOC. And a level 1's a full activation. But I was just doing the FEMA agencies, or FEMA folks. I said, do notional notifications to the external stakeholders. This is for the FEMA team. And about the time I got in there and we got into our first briefing, there was a lot of angry people. I heard a lot of, hey, we didn't know there was an exercise. Or, hey, I was in my car. How do you expect me to do what I need to do if I'm not even in the office? Or I don't have that stuff with me all the time. It's in my office. And I let them stew for a little bit, and I'm like, well, welcome to my world. Disasters don't come with warnings. They're not going to occur when we're ready or prepared. And, I don't want anybody to personalize this and seen as something I was doing to make you fail. But I want everybody to understand that we will not be an organization that just responds to hurricanes. And that was, again, after Katrina was, the kind of the legacy of the agency was everything was built around hurricanes. So, like, I can see a hurricane coming. The best I've seen with earthquakes is maybe a couple of minutes, and that's usually marginal. So we're going to change this up, and we're going to focus on not what we expect, not what we're used to handling, and not what we're capable of. We're going to deal with the things that are out there that can occur, and they're going to break the system. And we're going to use both noticed and unnoticed exercises to build our capabilities to be rapid problem solvers and the ability to rapidly escalate our federal response in anticipation of a state's need.
It's just amazing. It's like church. I mean, I can't. But
you're taking us to church, Greg.
The follow up though is, I mean, you did do similar exercises, really charged exercises, with the senior members of cabinet and the upper levels of the administration. So how did you get that level of buy-in for this?
Well, actually, they had started that before I got there, and it was something that the president's team believed in, and he participated in those exercises. So I was able to build upon that, and once I got there, I was able to steer some of those exercises in the areas that I thought were going to be more pressing. But really, it was the president who gave me the political cover to say that we are going to exercise as a team. He most famously said this was before I got into the position, but in a cabinet meeting, one of the early ones, he told all his cabinet members that the challenges the country faces are bigger than any one cabinet agency. And we will not be successful trying to deal with these as a collection of cabinet agencies. We're going to have to work as a team. So that was already in his DNA. That's how he wanted to build the federal response. And again, you got to remember, when he walked in there, they were dealing with this huge recession and all the things that were going wrong faster than you could even imagine what you're going to do to solve them. And so it was that approach that he had established that really blended in with what I wanted to do, and essentially gave me the ability to do that. But first things first, you had to get FEMA from where we were at to where we needed to be. And a lot of people said, your job's to fix FEMA. I said, well, I don't think FEMA needs to be fixed. I think FEMA's got a lot of great people, but I do think there are things we could do better. And that's what we're going to focus on.
So I want to ask you about that, but first I just want to clarify. You said you and President Obama didn't do any sports. Did you play cards? Did you play pool? Any games?
Other than giving me a hard time, he has very dry humor, and I was the butt of many of his jokes, including telling me I was doing a heck of a job, Fugate, and other things that caused me to cringe.
He did not
hear that.
And wonder about what did he mean by that. But he was a great boss. In a crisis, he essentially, his first and always last question to me is, do I have everything I need? And he backed that up with his chief of staff and his people. Alyssa Mastromonica, who was the first term and through Hurricane Sandy, was essentially his deputy chief of staff for operations. We worked with a lot. And it was again, I wasn't a political person. I didn't campaign. I didn't know a lot of these folks until I got into the administration. But it was a great working environment for me to know that if anything came up, that was always the backing, from the president. What do you need from me? And I was fortunate that it was rare I ever needed anything, and generally when I did, it was pretty straightforward to get it resolved. And after that, it turned out I didn't need that as much either, because as people realized that the president was going to back me on a lot of the stuff, I stopped having to find myself in these difficult negotiations.
Damn, that is artillery. Well, so let me ask you the question then. So after Katrina, we had the post-Katrina Emergency Management Reform Act. A lot of emergency managers feel that 9/11 put emergency management kind of on the wrong road, too Homeland Security focused. You're coming in on the heels of that legislation into FEMA, a great organization, but with some issues. What did you do to really raise it to the next level of excellence?
I told everybody quit worrying about what other people are doing and better worry about what we're going to do. Well, first of all, Homeland Security, when you talk about what FEMA does, we do consequence management. And it don't really matter to me what causes it. You're dealing with consequences, whether it's chem, bio, structural collapses, mass casualties, active shooter. Those are consequences. And so this is, and I try to explain to people, particularly in the Homeland Security enterprise, that the reason we call it all hazard is the mayor's not changing just because the disaster cause changed. Whether it be flooding, a terrorist attack, a pandemic, you name it. The mayor is the mayor. The team literally is the same team. Now, who's got lead role changes and what authorities you operate under changes and who's going to pay will change. The team doesn't change. The things you got to do really don't change. And I think part of what I saw throughout all this after 9/11 was a lot of emergency managers who weren't sure of their roles before 9/11 were very confused afterwards. Yes. And they heard all these people now hijacking their programs and their talking points and saying, now this is Homeland Security. And I was like, yeah, emergency management's emergency management. It fits nicely within Homeland Security, but it's not the same thing. It's our ability, again, to take government who's not set up on a day-to-day basis to respond to a crisis and reorganize it. And think about emergency management. Very few things we do have standing organizations that only do that full time. Usually it's agencies that have other collateral duties that can be adjusted or can be modified to meet that need in a crisis. So, I wasn't one of these people going around that, after 9/11 going, who are we, what do we do, what's our purpose, are we still relevant, should we change the name of our organization, should we change the name of our national organizations to add Homeland Security? And I'm like, nah, I'm an emergency manager. I don't know what you are, but I didn't change because of 9/11.
Emergency managers, are often tasked with kind of non-emergency management work or work that doesn't traditionally fall into the buckets of planning, training, evaluation, response. And you had a couple of these big special projects while you were at FEMA. The one that comes to my mind is the refugee crisis at the border, where children were coming across the border, and FEMA was asked to come in and help that situation. I'm just curious what your approach to these kind of special project requests, is, and did you ever push back and say, that's not FEMA's mandate, we can't do that, or did?
Why would I push back? It was mass care.
Yeah.
I never understood why everybody got so bent out of shape about it. I mean, we literally had kids. I'm talking kids. And a lot of people thought these were all teenagers, like 17-year-old males. There was everything down to infants. This was mass care. It wasn't anything to do with policy. It was the fact that the system got backed up and we had children in detention cells meant for adults, not just there for 24 hours, but literally for days to weeks. And the system had collapsed. And rather than sitting around, pointing fingers or saying, well, you should have done this, you should have done that, I just took the approach was, it's mass care, these are children, the politics will sort itself out. Our focus will be on meeting the needs of these children, and we're going to do it around the basic principles of getting them somewhere safe, getting them safe food, getting them somewhere where they can get basic services. So I never really understood why everybody thought it was such a big deal of stepping out of my lane. These were children in distress that needed basically mass care resources. The system was not responding fast enough. And we got asked by the White House, the President, and the Homeland Security Council to see if we could assist the agencies that did have the lead role. And in many cases, we were able to take our experiences dealing with mass care and apply them to this emergency. But to me, it was no big stretch of emergency management. It was like, guys, I don't know what you signed up to do, but I signed up to help people. There are children who need help. I can remember, calling several of the senators, briefing them on what we were doing, and generally the universal reaction I got back from folks, including Senator Coburn from Oklahoma, was, Craig, how do we help? There was none of this about, well, this is immigration policy go wrong. This is what did you expect was going to happen. It's a little late for this, folks. They're here. They're in need. We can do something about this. We're not going to sit around and debate policy. We're going to try to help people, and we're going to do what we do best, which is basic emergency management, mass care. Nothing real fancy about it. So that's what we did.
So I think the Flint crisis is another one of these where you guys kind of got in and there was a conversation about, is this in FEMA's lane, is it not? You were supporting HHS. I guess the question I want to ask about it is, that's something, as all disasters are, that's really clearly local. It's a very local issue with local stakeholders. How does FEMA come in as an organization and try to figure out how to support the locals, especially in a situation as complex as that one was?
Well, first of all, we weren't supporting HHS. That was probably a misnomer out there. We were supporting the governor. He requested and received an emergency declaration, and we were doing what we do in emergency declarations. We were supporting the governor. We had an emergency declaration from the president. We were providing logistical support to the governor at his direction to support the team. We were not involved directly in the public health aspects of this. We were basically involved in the logistics of supporting the governor and his team, and through the governor, the local officials. So we were doing filters, we were doing bottled water, we were doing emergency public information, just, the stuff we do in disasters. So again, as people got all spun up about this, I'm like, last time I checked, governors asked for emergency declarations. This met the criteria. It was a limited response. Everything FEMA did was in support of the governor through our authorities under the Stafford Act, and I didn't see anything really earth-shattering about doing it. Not the first time we've done this. If you remember, we had something called West Virginia where we had a chemical spill down there to shut off the water supply, and we had a request from the governor for water, and that was a logistical operation. So we weren't working for the public health aspects of this. We were supporting the logistics that the governor had requested of us.
Well, I think it sets a good example of, for emergency managers to see, be aware of what's going on, to see emergencies that maybe you don't at the onset look like it maybe fits, but that you can provide a need for a response to.
This is kind of my point, though. Emergency management isn't about the hazard. Everything gets wrapped around, it's got to be a natural hazard. Well, no, it doesn't. It is when the org chart of government cannot cope, keep up with, or manage the event that we step in and perform our function, which is helping bring organizational skills and basically a systematic approach in a crisis to problem solving. And we do that under our emergency authorities that are vested in us at the various levels of government through our executive elected officials.
Right. It's problem solving the crisis, not necessarily specific to a set of hazards.
And I think, so one thing that I feel like you've spoken eloquently about, and correct me if I'm getting it wrong, is the way that the feds are supporting, right? And the locals in the state really have to have good sort of pre-incident mitigation actions that are there that are kind of really trying to cut the results of the crisis down, right? The states have got to kind of pony up resources. The locals need to have active emergency management, or else the federal level can't do anything. And
it certainly helps.
Well, the question then I want to ask you, and we can't let you go without at least asking you about the proposed Trump cuts to the FEMA budget, the flood map redrawing cuts, the HUD cuts about community rehabilitating, the block grant cuts, but also this cut to the pre-disaster mitigation grant program, which is they're asking to cut more than 60%, which is really squarely in the middle of this idea of states doing this level of mitigation work. I mean, as a former administrator, do those cuts concern you?
Nope.
Fair point.
Why don't they concern you?
Well, first of all, if pre-disaster mitigation was so important, how come the only time you guys do it is when you get a bribe from the federal government? And the second thing is, when's the last time you ever saw a president's budget implemented by Congress?
That's probably.
So
Although I do enjoy the bribes. The bribes are one of my favorites.
I do not get too excited about presidential budgets after being through that process for a number of years. I come to learn that budgets from the president are a communication device to communicate the administration's policies and preferences. But under our Constitution, the only entity that can appropriate funds is Congress. And I have seen time and time again where we have reduced funding for grants in our request, and Congress put them back. I've seen where we had looked at the pre-disaster mitigation grant program during sequestration and says, can we really afford to keep that going versus other things? Let's zero it out. And Congress put money back in it. So I don't get too excited about a presidential budget. I get more concerned about whatever the budget committee comes up with as the top level mark and what the appropriation chairs get. Because then everything that is in that appropriator's responsibility has to fit into that cap, and that will oftentimes tell you what kind of cuts, if any, a program's going to have to take. I've always marveled that everybody gets all bent out of shape about pre-disaster mitigation grant dollars. They always tell me how great they are, and I'm like, really? So when's the last time the state or local government put up their own mitigation dollars without some federal bribe to get them to do it?
So what do you think then? So leaving aside the money, what do you think would help do that? What do you think would be the wisdom you would give to locals and states to help them get better prepared for disasters, leaving the federal component out of it?
Use better building codes and land use management. Don't build crap in the wrong places. We don't have to pick up the pieces every time a storm or a disaster occurs that we would expect. I tell people we only pay for uninsured losses. And what government's basically been doing at the local and state level is shifting a lot of risk to the federal taxpayer. And they're doing it in such a way that they make decisions every day about where we build, how we build, yet they always tend to be biased towards the short-term gain versus what the total cost is. We always hear this about, hey, if you're trying to increase the codes, you're going to make homes unaffordable. Well, not really. If they're not insurable, then that's not affordable. It's the total cost of ownership. But I've seen too many times people that are trying to develop and build in areas are basically allowed to against the better judgment of folks that should know better, because it's all about jobs. It's all about growing the economy. It's all about growing the tax base. But when a disaster rolls around, they get away with it because the federal disaster criteria, the disaster thresholds are so low that it's really bad. Somebody else will come in and clean up their mistakes. So you really want to talk about mitigation? You got to talk about building codes and land use planning, and we need to start talking about private insurance covering the risk.
Let me just ask you about, because one idea that people have floated is this idea of a disaster deductible, that states that don't follow good building codes, that don't follow good land use practices, would have to pay more of their own costs in a disaster to make up for it.
In a federally declared disaster.
Yeah, that's right. So
that was my idea.
Oh, well, there you go.
That was ours.
Let me mansplain that to you.
That's right. If I could mansplain your own idea back to you, Craig, that would be great.
Yeah, we know that some states have done a lot of work to buy down their risk, but they don't really get any credits. We default back to almost religiously a per capita impact to a state without looking at other mitigating factors. So if you got states side by side, one of them's doing a lot of work to enforce building codes, make sure that they're building and developing in sustainable ways, and you got a state next to them that isn't, why should they get the same reward? And it's the idea that the more you have that responsibility for those first dollars, the more hopefully we can get state and local governments to look at why are we growing our risk versus taking concrete steps to buy down and build resiliency in our tax base and in our communities, and take that longer view and really price risk for what it costs versus this false economy we have with the disaster funds, the National Flood Insurance, and other programs that really subsidize risk below the point where we're seeing the changes in behavior we need. And so I started, I've been dealing with response for so long that when I got out of FEMA, I really want to take a step back and start going, the problem with the temporary housing program at FEMA isn't FEMA. It's that we're having to replace so many homes after disaster in the first place. Why? And it's basically we didn't build the homes for the environment they're in, and then we expect somebody to have a magic solution when you lose 10, 15, 20,000 homes in one event. Well, how long did it take you to build those homes? And then why do you think there's an instantaneous response that will provide everybody a place to live in the next 90 days that's actually going to work? The real solution to the temporary housing is building houses to better codes more appropriate for the risk we face. And, moving from this, we lose them all to, they got damaged, but we can repair them and get people back in their homes. I'm not about taking away people's property rights, but I do think we should seriously look at how we subsidize risk in this country and really move back to a question that I keep asking. If the private sector won't insure it, why is the taxpayer picking up the bill?
We have to put you through our lightning round.
Craig, before you go, this is going to be a special Fugate edition, so we're renaming it Lightning Bolt Round.
That's right. Wait, isn't it Thunderbolt?
Oh, crap. I already screwed it up. Sorry. Thunderbolt Round. Okay, so are you ready? Are you prepped? Do you have a sit rep in front of you? Okay, so first question, what's your favorite Waffle House menu item?
Hash browns, scattered and smothered.
Oh, man. As a follow-up, do you get to eat free at Waffle House? You've given them so much press.
They most Waffle Houses wouldn't know who the hell I was when I walked in there, so I pay like everybody else.
All right.
Did you ever get noticed walking around Washington, D.C.? Like, are you famous on the streets of D.C.?
Only the staffers and committee staff.
Yeah.
What's the closest? Is there a Waffle House in D.C.? Is there
I think West Virginia is the closest.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, there's one over in Virginia.
All right.
Okay.
All right, so you have to choose one to do for the rest of your life. Planning, training, exercising, or evaluation. Which one do you choose?
Training.
Interesting. Notice we didn't include response in that because I think everybody would choose response. Okay.
I wouldn't. I would rather build teams. Training is the most important thing we do. The better we train, the better we prepare the future leaders to deal with the stuff that the joke in our business is your first big disaster is your first big disaster. Why aren't we training people better so when they have that first big event, they're not the proverbial deer in the headlights?
Training more important than exercising, you think?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, if you don't know what you're doing, exercising just is a sense of fertility. You just get so wrapped up and you're never going to be able to get your head wrapped around it. If you got good training, you know your craft, you know your doctrine, you know what it can do, and more importantly, you know why you're doing it. So when you have to adjust, you can make smart adjustments. I think that's one of my biggest complaints about incident command and some of the other stuff. There's a lot of people that know what to do, but there are very few people that know why we do it and have the understanding enough of the system to make adjustments when it's not working. So it fits the scenario, so you're not trying to make the disaster fit your structure.
See, we're getting real. This is real Thunderbolt.
This is a real Thunderbolt. So, okay, third question. Are incident action plans useful? Answer off the top of your head. Don't think about it.
Nope.
Oh, burn!
We can't go into this. We got to save that for next episode.
We got to keep going. What's your favorite hazard? What's the hazard you're most interested in?
Geomagnetic storms.
Oh my gosh. Okay, what's the hazard that scares you the most?
Earthquakes.
Oh, interesting.
What's your first disaster that you remember personally, not that you worked?
My little sister going into respiratory and cardiac arrest and having to do CPR for the first time in my life. And I wasn't even into business yet.
Oh God,
my gosh.
Oh. Yeah, you got to follow that up.
Yeah, thanks, Mitch. So what is your dream emergency management job? This is interesting considering where you just came from.
My dream emergency management job is getting somebody to fund me a think tank where I can sit around, bringing really smart people together and asking, are the ways we're doing it making sense? Are they actually, based upon science or just our guts? And how do we actually improve our profession by building simulations and labs to test what we do, our theories, and improve upon them. Always understanding that there's always the human element. We work for elected leaders, most of them who will have little or no time in our business, and we have to be there to support them so they're successful so that we can help change outcomes. But to actually have the time and the resources to bring the best and the brightest together and ask serious questions like, what is the purpose of an EOC? Is it the big screens, the computer software, the processes, the instant action plans, or is it getting people in a room to talk to each other, shortening communication links, getting to a higher trust faster, but faster answers? A lot of EOCs, they just email each other, and I'm like, you could have done that from your office. Why don't you turn around and talk to somebody?
Yeah. You heard it here first. Venture capitalists. Who wants to fund the new Fugate think tank?
Yeah, I'm just going to forward you my resume here. Click. Right.
Okay, what's your favorite disaster movie you can't say volcano?
Towering Inferno.
Oh, nice. Good one. Classic.
What is I'm going to combine two here because we're running out of time. What's the best and worst ICS position?
Well, the best is the incident commander. The worst is their ops chief, who then has to take all the crazy stuff the IC came up with and make it work.
Good answer. True. Best answer. Okay, what's your favorite emergency management acronym?
FEMA.
Okay, all right. I got to ask you this one. As a former graduate of Florida State University, who's your favorite University of Florida professor?
Oh, well, I'm working on a bunch of them right now, so I best not say. But since you did bring it up, which college has won a national championship in men's football, basketball, and baseball in the last 50 years?
I can't answer that. I got to toss it to you, Andrew.
You cut deep, Fugate. Okay, last one.
It would be the University of Florida.
Okay.
The first team since the Vietnam War to sweep all major men's sports with national championships.
Okay, we're going to fact check that.
If we could we'll get our people on that. PolitiFact is going to.
Well, there's been several college basketball national championships. I believe you remember our four guys who won several of those.
I'm pretty clear.
A couple national championships in football. This guy Tebow was part of one of those.
Yeah.
But most recently this summer, the Gator baseball team won the College World Series. Mm-hmm. So that gives us a sweep of all three major men's sports and the only team to do it in the last 50 years.
I'm just going to
Okay, do they have an emergency management program, though? Because the University of North Texas, where I went, definitely has a good
Don't
program.
go there. Don't bring up Texas. All right, last question.
All right, last one, Craig. What is your favorite piece of emergency management gear?
Oh, my windbreaker.
That you wore to the White House.
Oh, nice.
Oh, yeah.
Nice.
By the way, did anybody push back on you to say, can you throw on a tie?
No, actually, I got that from Gibbs when I was over there early in the administration. I was coming over for a briefing. They called to say, hey, can I come over and do a stand-up in the press room? I think there was some hurricane out there, still far away, but they wanted me to go out and talk, and I'm like, I told our guys that were talking to the White House, says, well, I'm going to have to go and change the suit. What time do I need to be over there? So let me check. And they called back and said, no, just wear your logo wear. So I went over into the press room and did a briefing wearing khakis and a FEMA shirt. And Robert Gibbs basically told me, says, I don't want you over here in a crisis wearing a suit. And
wow.
So from that point forward, I always wore, if it was some emergency I was over there for, I wore logo wear, including briefing POTUS and the Oval, wearing a windbreaker, which kind of wigged out people. But my joke was, if I was wearing a suit, I was in camouflage, because I looked like everybody else at the White House.
That's right.
And it got so bad that even President and Vice President Biden would give me a hard time when I'm wearing a suit, going, oh, we didn't realize you could clean up, or that you could dress up, or whatever else. But
if you could have your think tank just put out a line of windbreakers, like a line of fashion forward.
There's a marketing opportunity here,
I really
Craig.
think so. We would buy them. We would be happy to market those on the show.
And probably out of everything you've done, you getting rid of suits in emergency management is something I'm, most proud of you doing.
That's right. We're very grateful. Thank you so much for being on the show tonight, Craig.
Well, thanks, guys. It was fun.
Can we quote you? Can we add that to your Wikipedia page?
That's right.
Dukes of Hazzard's
From Craig
podcast.
Fugate.
Quote,
it was
fun.
No, I think...
Well, it was a lot more fun than a lot of interviews I went through.
It's because we're so professional.
And I think, but also we learned a lot. Like,
Yeah.
legitimately, I think that we've covered a lot of ground. We've literally learned a lot of your stuff.
Thanks again, Craig. We really look forward to seeing what you get into and appreciate your service to the country and to emergency management.
Well, guys, keep doing these podcasts. I listened to a couple of them. I find them both fascinating, somewhat hilarious, and irrelevant. But it's good to have practitioners talking about our craft, not having somebody else trying to talk about it who doesn't understand it. I know you guys kind of do this when you can, but of all the things out there, I think for a lot of emergency managers, they would. It's funny, it's helpful, but it's their peers, and I think that's what makes this podcast a lot different from others. Is you guys are practitioners. This is your craft. This is your opportunity to talk about it. So keep doing these podcasts, and thanks for having me on.
Well, we appreciate it. We will keep doing it, and we love the industry,
And we will try to keep being both fascinating and irrelevant.
and we'd love to have you back on sometime if you ever have something you want to come back and talk
And
about.
we're looking forward to the think tank, the
Yep.
Craig Fugate think tank, everybody.
Resumes in your inbox.
Woo! Oh my God.
Okay. My mind is
It's
spinning.
blown. I know, right? I just feel like I went to emergency management grad school.
I know. I feel like I actually need to re-listen to this one and take notes.
That's right, on ourselves.
Yeah.
Mostly not on ourselves, but yeah.
So be humble, emergency managers. Be humble.
That's
Give other
right.
people wins. Get that buy-in. Be proactive.
Don't be afraid to wake anybody up at 6 o'clock in the morning or 4 o'clock in the morning at any time for any reason
Right.
to make sure that they're on point.
There's always going to be a hearing. There's always going to be questions asked, after the emergency. So it's better to over respond. than
Survivors,
under
not
respond.
victims. And we actually didn't even get to my favorite Craig Fugate quote, which is, it's just like horseshoes,
Hand grenades,
and thermonuclear weapons. Just get close enough, and it counts.
That can be on the windbreakers that we sell.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful windbreaker.
We actually should do that. That's copyrighted. Nobody steal that.
Yeah. It's going to have a horseshoe and a hand grenade and a thermonuclear weapon on
Yeah.
it. It's beautiful. So everybody, give us a call at 859-429-2731. Ask us a question. Tell us what you want to hear more of, less of. Game of Thrones is coming back in a week.
That's
so
right.
If anybody wants to give us predictions for that.
This will transition to a Game of Thrones podcast.
That's right. It's going to be Tyrion. Tyrion's going to live, isn't he? He is.
Follow us on Hazards Podcast. Give us questions you want us to ask Craig if we ever have him back. And
you know what? I just want to say one more thing before we go in honor of our July 4th. And do you know what that thing is?
We're going to live on.
We are.
We're going to survive.
Because Craig Fugate is there for us.
Today,
kind of, although he's
we
retired.
celebrate
Crap.
our
He's going to open a think tank.
Yes. Slow cap.
That's right. Slow clap. For being both fascinating.
And I'd like to
irrelevant.
say we're also, in honor of having Craig on, we're both wearing khaki cargo pants and have response shirts on.
That's right. And a windbreaker. I've got the classic
true. You
windbreaker
do have
look.
the windbreaker.
We're going to be modeling those. Our line is going to be coming out in October, so everybody stay tuned for Emergency Management Fashion Week next year.
Thanks for listening. Hey, Cox. Glad you made an appearance this episode. You came in right at the end.
Always going to
Cox.
have the dog barking in the. That's because we're professionals.
That's right.